Actually, Jason Bermas video. It's only 14 minutes long. It was actually an hour-long video on the Mel K Show. You'll notice in the last couple of years, whatever's left of the fringe elements of the 9/11 Truth Movement have been gravitating toward Christian evangelical platforms. And that's only because Christian evangelical platforms are heavily against the state, anything to do with the establishment, the New World Order, Illuminati, these vague terms that describe the federal government and the intelligence services and foreign elements as well. And another thing about going on these platforms is that they already are taking a lot of stuff on faith, one of it being religion. And so when you have people like Jason Bermas and others that go on these shows, they are already just going to believe them because Bermas is coming at them from an anti-establishment point of view regarding 9/11. And so they're not going to fact check. They're just basically going to agree with him and say that he's an authority. And so this is where the problems arise with the 9/11 Truth Movement, is that people like him actually poison the well, so to speak. So let's see what they have to say. It's probably going to be about the Canestraro file.
K Show, you have seen my guest here many times. He is the one guy that when everyone's distracted and looking all other directions, Jason Bermas is cutting down to what we should really be looking at. And thank you for joining me, Jason, as always.
Thank you for having me, Mel.
Oh, it's my pleasure as always. And you've been very busy, so it's been a little harder to get you, but I'm very grateful you're here. I want to first and foremost remind everyone that Jason was involved in a documentary called Loose Change about 9/11. If you have not seen it, I highly recommend it, as all of his documentaries. But crazy enough, this...
As you can see, he's not disassociated from Loose Change, even though Loose Change propagates a lot of the theories that Bermas and Dylan Avery has sometimes stood away from. But he still lives by it.
This past week, there was some news about 9/11. Immediately, I looked to Jason. I go to his site. I'm like, I knew he would be on it. And no one else reported it. It's very important that people understand.
Actually, I reported before him. In fact, I'm one of the very first people to report it. I actually got it from the Florida Bulldog, who was the first person to report, Dan Christensen. So I made my first video 3 weeks ago. Jason Bermas made his video 10 days ago. So
understand that this is not over. Jason's never letting it go. Jason, can you tell the audience what they missed this week about 9/11?
Yeah, so here's the deal. Nobody in the U.S. media picked up this story.
Again, not true. Actually, Florida Bulldog is the one that broke the story, not RT, that he's going to basically probably assert that that's what broke the story.
But this is an article by Felix Lipschitz for RT, and actually there's a base article behind it. And guess what? They also link to the actual documents that were created in the good old US of A. But every time I share the article, Mel, guess what? It comes up as Russian disinformation.
Oh, wow.
So the lunatics and the hystericals refuse to even click on it, even though I've pointed out numerous times that the article behind me is by a gentleman named Felix Lipschitz.
So you critique people not looking at your information because they think it's Russian disinformation. I think that's pretty ironic, because when people like myself and my co-researcher, DJ Thermodetonator, have made videos pertaining to your errors that you've made over the years, you have basically ignored that and continue to repeat those errors. So I think that's funny.
And right here, yes, very Russian sounding name, I know. And right here, right in the very beginning, if you look at the filings, everything is linked. So the document that is being referred to is right here, Mel. And right now, this is an unclassified declaration by Donald C. Canestrario. And he's involved in the military commissions hearings that have been going on now for some time, and has been acting in a defense organization capacity since 2016 of April. So literally now about 7 years. And this declaration is really expanding on something that I've reported on for many years now. Is that the CIA shepherded and protected a lot of these guys at the very least, and it
Right.
seems like they recruited them and were running them in some cases, specifically in the case of Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Mihdhar.
Yeah, let me stop right there. That's not true. So this is an error that I've seen constantly coming from the Canastrell file. And let me clear this up once again. The CIA and the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate, or the Mahabeth in Arabic, were working together jointly inside the United States, which would make it an illegal operation because by law, the Central Intelligence Agency is not allowed to conduct operations inside the United States. They're a foreign entity, even though they're a domestic agency. They investigate foreign crimes. The Department of Justice, the FBI, is the domestic agency that investigates domestic crimes. Anyway, they had gotten information from the NSA. The NSA was the primary agency that informed the CIA about two men, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, that were going to attend a meeting in Malaysia with al-Qaeda operatives between January 5th and January 8th. The CIA then took control of the operation and basically followed the two men using Saudi operatives to basically act as sympathizers in the hopes of trying to obtain intelligence about what Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were doing inside the United States. Now, at the same time, the CIA knew these two men were al-Qaeda operatives that were meeting with a planner of the Cole bombing in Tawfiq bin Attash, also known as Khalid. Now, the FBI was investigating the Cole bombing, and this would have made the FBI open up a criminal investigation and not an intelligence investigation on Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi had when they arrived inside the United States. That's another reason why the CIA didn't tell the FBI. So while the two men were here, the Saudis were basically meeting with them. One Saudi agent named Anwar al-Bayumi had met them at the Mediterranean Cafe in Los Angeles, just by chance. And basically paid their 2 months rent at first, helped them get driver's licenses opened in their name. And when they moved from Los Angeles to San Diego, basically they were situated by Omar al-Bayumi. They opened up a bank account there under Anwar al-Awlaki, an American Yemeni militant who helped them get bank accounts. And the thing is that they were not informants. The CIA and the Saudis wanted to collect intelligence because they had no idea what they were doing inside the country. They wanted to know what they were doing. At the same time, the CIA back in 1999, under the director of the Counterterrorism Center, Kofor Black, wanted informants inside al-Qaeda because he was pretty critical that the agency did not have informants inside this group. So that was another reason why they wanted to try and turn these two people. But however, Khalid al-Mihdhar had traveled to Yemen to visit his pregnant wife, and Nawaf al-Hazmi stood behind. Now, they moved into an apartment of an FBI informant, they had no idea, named Abdul Sheikh. And so one day, Nawaf al-Hazmi told Abdul Sheikh that they did not trust Omar al-Bayumi because they thought he was a Saudi spy. That's coming from Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalid al-Mihdhar. So even if they wanted to try and turn them, well, it failed because they thought he was a spy. Because Omar al-Bayumi is basically walking around, doesn't have a job, he's getting all this money. He's a ghost employee at Dal Avco. He's walking around with a camera all the time, meeting with young Saudi men. Meanwhile, you have an imam in Los Angeles, the King Fahd Mosque, Fahad al-Tameri. And both Fahad al-Tameri and Omar al-Bayoumi were answering to the former U.S. Saudi Minister of Religious Affairs in Washington, D.C., Muwasset al-Jarrah, who got Fahad al-Tameri that job and who taxed Omar al-Bayoumi to look out for Khalid al-Bin al-Hazmi. That's who was named in the Operation Encore files. So I hope that explains it. They were not CIA informants. They were not assets, but they were protected. You're right about that. But they were protected so that the FBI wouldn't investigate and detain these two men because they were running a covert illegal operation that would have gotten not just Saudi Arabia in trouble, but the CIA in trouble.
Al-Madar is so important because a lot of information also came out about him even after I did Fabled Enemies. Now, in Fabled Enemies, within the first 10 minutes of the film, Mel, we go to Diane Albritton, who is a neighbor of Walid al-Shieri, one of the alleged hijackers, and numerous others. Now, Mel, she called not the police, not even the FBI. She called the Central Intelligence Agency on them prior to 9/11, and nothing was done. Now, that coincides with yet another story that has never been covered in the United States by any mainstream.
Which, on the other, to play devil's advocate, why is she calling the CIA? Well, she was suspicious about Walid al-Sheri, whose brother is Walid, that they were loud and that they were meeting people in the night. You know, who are these people? I mean, you would probably call the cops for noise pollution, but you call the CIA. What's the CIA basically going to say? Oh, we'll investigate the matter. They probably handed it off to local police. Now, at the same time, if the CIA knew about these people inside on the Northeast, well, that's news to me because I never heard of the CIA protecting the muscle hijackers. They were basically doing that just for Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalid al-Bidar, and later Hani Hanjour. In all my years of research, I never seen any link between the CIA and the East Coast muscle hijackers. That would be the Israelis through their art student ring and moving companies that were basically located in New York, New Jersey, and Florida.
Media, and I don't believe was even covered by RT. And that was the Dark Overlords data dump from 2018, about 5 years ago. And I know a lot of people are going to, now you're getting Dark Overlord. What are you talking about, Jason? These hacker groups have names.
Right.
One of them was the Dark Overlord. And I would point out, if you look that up, past 2018, it seems like a bunch of them got arrested kind of on the sly. So there are small reports that these people were picked up. And initially what they were doing was asking for $1 million Bitcoin bounty. And those that donated, right, as soon as you hit that, they were going to release all 5 quote-unquote layers of these documents. So they were encrypted files. I could not decrypt them without the actual codes. Brute force attacks were not working. Nobody I know has ever been able to crack the codes. But they ended up, even though they didn't hit their financial markers, releasing the first 3 layers. And hidden in one of those layers was James Wood's secret testimony in one of the many hearings we never heard about in civil cases for 9/11. And in it, he was deposed because he had gone on television and actually been interviewed about his experience on 9/11 and before 9/11. So James Woods had actually called up the FBI, told them about an instance in August on the morning of 9/11 when he saw the attacks. And that instance, as described in this secret testimony, was that he, a flight attendant, and the plane's captain all filed a report with the FAA when they saw 4 men casing the plane in first class, by the way, and they thought they were going to hijack it. To the point that in this testimony, Mel, James Woods actually talks about the fact that when he got his dinner, he hid a butter knife and did not give it back in case these guys who were sitting behind him had gone after the plane.
Let me talk more about this issue with the Dark Overlords. And I note about these files, and there's really nothing damning in them. When they released the first data set, actually, they claimed that they got information from Lloyd's of London, Silverstein Properties, and Hiscox syndicates, which are all real estate firms and insurers. And basically what happened was that nothing revealing came about. In Layer 1, which was published, it consisted largely of these, and I remember downloading them. They were Microsoft Word files, which were allegedly assessing the potential legal liability for airlines and various companies after the 9/11 attacks. And according to one report, the most notable inclusion is a text document containing the transcript of a 2007 deposition from a former American Airlines operations specialist who received a phone call from a flight attendant working on one of the hijacked planes. So it's, one of the people that got arrested was Dylan Wyatt, I think that was his name, and he was extradited from the UK to the United States, and he got 5 years. But there was no real, there was no big issue, I guess, regarding any of these files. There was nothing damning. They just wanted money. I mean, really, look, if they were against the state, so to speak, they wanted to basically, screw the state and show the public, real crimes, they would have done it. And it was all about a money grab. They wanted 2 million in Bitcoin. They don't care about justice. Every time I hear Jason Bermas bring this up, I got to snicker a little bit because nothing really damning about these files.
So he actually talks with the pilot. The pilot sees the men, locks the cockpit, makes the filing. Nothing's ever said or done. Obviously, that would have gone to intelligence agencies, especially because guess what? According to James Woods, it was Flight 11. That's where it gets tricky.
Well, here's another one, Jason. The idea of Arab fundamentalists casing planes for security lapses isn't new, right? A year prior to 9/11, there was 2 men named Mohammed Al-Quatareen, and I forgot the other one's name, Shalawi, I think. And these were 2 men that were traveling from Arizona to Washington, D.C. And it was a Delta Airlines plane. And they actually went to near the front of the cockpit, and they asked, where's the bathroom? They thought that was the bathroom. Waitress showed them it was in the back of the plane. A couple of minutes later, they go back to the front of the plane saying they need to use the bathroom. And the waitress said, oh, no, this is not the bathroom. We told you it was in the back of the plane. And so these 2 men were actually talking about, how do you shut off the oxygen? What can we see the cockpit? And we found out that these 2 men basically were also involved with a memorandum called the Phoenix Memo, because one name in particular, Zachariah Subra, basically was known to one of the men, Shalawi, I think. And Shalawi had a car that was used by a militant in Afghanistan that was connected to Al-Qaeda. And they were on their way to the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. There was an investigation by the FBI and found out that, yes, these guys have terrorist ties to militants connected to the Saudi kingdom. There was another issue regarding 5 Qataris, I think. And basically, they were on a plane the night before. They were going to hijack Flight 77. But that these guys chickened out and they took off out of the country the day before, September 11, 2001. And Mohammed Atta would go with Marwan al-Shehhi to airports like in Atlanta and case the joint. looking for security lapses and study which planes had lighter loads on what day. Well, these makes you wonder how many of these planes were going to be hijacked, because who are these individuals? And we all know now about the fifth plane, United Airlines Flight 23 that you talk about. Well, you weren't the only one. In fact, the first person to talk about was Paul Thompson, who wrote the best 9/11 book, I think, The Terror Timeline. I didn't make films, so I didn't, report on this. I did a podcast on this 4 years ago about Flight 23. My co-researcher, Nelson Martins, he did a brilliant film about the additional hijacking of September 13th, or potential hijackings, and the mass arrests of many Arabs that were trying to board these planes with weapons, one dressed as a pilot.
So Flight 11, according to the main version, is that Muhammad Atta is the lead hijacker there. Khalid al-Mihdhar is a lead hijacker on 77, or the Pentagon. Okay? And they never really describe how they know who the lead hijackers are or any of this. Al-Mihdhar is on Flight 11, according to James Woods. That's a big no-no. That shouldn't be happening. And Al-Mihdhar is the one that's heavily discussed as the CIA asset. But wait, it gets better. So
that's according to James Woods. Now, again, this is not confirmed by anybody else, right? So James Woods is saying there's a guy that looked like Khalid al-Mihdhar. Looked like. That's entirely different than it was Khalid al-Mihdhar. And of course, Khalid al-Mihdhar's name is not on the flight manifest of that plane.
Extensive view of this. This is actually even more in depth, and this came out on the 9th, so about a week ago. Right. This site called Florida Bulldog does an extensive job of explaining, essentially how they were recruited and how the CIA was spying on the.
No, again, Dan Christensen, who runs Florida Bulldog, doesn't say that they were recruited. Neither does the document. Never says that. Recruited into what? The CIA, the Saudi intelligence? They don't recruit terrorists, right? They use them, monitor them, surveil them, collect intelligence about them, find out what they're up to, and then basically try to either stop the plot, manipulate the plot, or allow the plot to transpire so it could benefit, right? These are the options you have to play. But they never said recruit. Never says it.
The FBI, and the FBI didn't trust the CIA. And this is where they say that they lose track of al-Hamzi and al-Mihdhar. Now, Richard Clarke, who was the terrorism czar and the guy that also alluded to the fact that Michael Hastings, who was reporting on the NSA, may have had his car blown up remotely. Remember that little fiasco?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He was the I failed you and your government failed you guy. And he's also featured in a film a lot of people don't know about called Press for Truth. And it's the story of the Jersey.
Which was directed by Ray Noloshilsky, who is one of the best 9/11 researchers. Him and John Duffy made the most important podcast called Who is Rich Blee? So because the name's Rich Blee and Alfredo Hampikowski and Michelle, in case you're known to the public, you should thank them. And even thanking them is going to seem hollow because their work was invaluable. And I'm grateful I interviewed them. But they are some of the best 9/11 researchers I've ever come across. And I don't speak very highly of many. Unfortunately, we don't have many reputable researchers for 9/11. But yes, he's responsible for directing 9/11 Press for Truth. And yeah, it's gone the ways of, over time, people become less knowledgeable about it. So some credit for Jason Bermas for bringing it up.
Girls, and essentially, mainly they're looking at terrorism funding and they're alluding to the Saudi Arabian aspect of this. Now, what most people don't know is that even though 17 of the 19 guys came from that consulate in Saudi Arabia, that was a CIA-run consulate. All right. We also in the film.
There really is no evidence to suggest this. I mean, yeah, it probably was. But there really, I mean, John Brennan, I think, was the Jeddah consular head official there. So probably was, but there is no direct evidence for it. We saw this story back in 1980 when J. Michael Springman was a consular officer of the Jeddah consular, again, the Jeddah U.S. Consul office, and basically that was a CIA operation. That was Operation Cyclone, and that allowed for these fundamentalists to enter the United States, to travel between Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia to the United States, almost like an open vacuum of militants coming to the United States. This time, there's a different program. It's called the Visa Express program, run by the State Department and the Immigration and Naturalization Service. And U.S. Consular Office in Jeddah was the primary source for this program. And one of the consular officers' name is Shana Steinger, who was actually interviewed by the FBI and basically at the Inspector General, and said that the amount of applications that were coming through this program was overwhelming, even for 2 or 3 people that were working at the office. In fact, one quit, which left her with about 500 cases a month, which is overwhelming. And usually with these applications from people people coming from countries that are suspected of terrorist activity like Afghanistan, well, they would have to go through a face-to-face meeting. But because these people were Saudis, they go right through. In other words, they can take an application, have it incomplete, and then after that, they're right inside the country. It's approved. Whereas if it was how it was after 9/11, there's an application that's going to be processed, has to be fully questioned. Where are you going? How much money you have? Who you're meeting? Do you speak English? Right? And then if that's approved, it goes to another stage, which is a face-to-face, where you meet with a representative of the Jeddah office. And then once that's approved, you then get a stamp on the passport, and your visa is either a tourist visa, a student visa, or a work visa. Depends. I think each one is a little bit different in terms of reevaluation dates. One's a 6-month, one's a 12-month. I don't know which one it was, but
Film Fabled Enemies have Michael Springman blowing the whistle on that, as he was one of the people that worked there and had to quit because he was being forced to give visas to people that didn't deserve it. And then he actually witnessed the NSA giving visas to people that he had denied.
CI.
All right. So you have this huge connection. You see that they are being what? Protected. And now, and by the way, it said in the very first paragraph, this gentleman, another gentleman who used to work for the FBI, and several others are saying it appears they were actually run by the CIA, which would make total and complete sense, and that they're not allowed to talk about everything they know. But they do link to several documents that this is the case. Richard Clark, who we were talking about earlier, back in 2009, admits that 55, not one analyst, 55 analysts had this information in the year run up to 9/11, and he believes that it was purposely withheld from the daily briefings on behalf of George Tenet, the then head of the CIA, and his head commissioner.
Okay, getting a little bit mixed up. We're talking about the entry of Khalid al-Mihdhar to Al-Azmi inside the United States while possessing dual U.S. visas. You have 55 agents within the Counterterrorism Center and this analytical station, the Bin Laden Issue Station, that were that had this information, but it wasn't shared with anybody from the National Security Council, which is Richard Clark's area, the FBI, or the State Department in their principals meetings. This was actually withheld from them. That's a lot of people. Richard Clark actually says that he could not believe that a lot of those 55 that he knew personally never told him about this. And so this information was not shared, but actually 2 FBI agents who were liaison officers to the Bin Laden issue station from New York under John O'Neill, Mark Rossini and Doug Miller, they saw the file, or the cable, I'm sorry, that had the information about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi coming from a Malaysia summit meeting and entering the United States. When they went to draft, Doug Miller went to draft a Central Intelligence report to warn the Department of Justice about their arrival. They had to get permission, and that was denied by the deputy director of the Bin Laden issue station, Tom Wilshire, who told his analyst, who was in charge of the Yemen hub investigation, Michelle Ann Casey, to tell Doug Miller to please hold off per Wilshire, which was written on the Central Intelligence Report. And when Mark Rossini complained to Michelle Ann Casey about why the draft cable was not being sent, she told him, and I've interviewed Mark Rossini, that it's not an FBI matter. We think the next attack is in Southeast Asia. We'll let the FBI know. Meanwhile, they're coming to the United States. It's not a CIA matter, but because the information is CIA information, it couldn't be shared because of the wall.
As well, no one's really talked about that either. You know, Richard Clark really could have said more during.
A lot of people talked about it. I talk about it ad nauseum. Paul Thompson, Kevin Fenton, John Gold, Robbie Martin, Ray Nowosielski, John Duffy, even the new guys, Project for New American Century, Darren Harvey, Sean Russell, Beyond Ground Zero podcast. You know, a lot of people. Sean McCarthy, Ben Howland. You know, a lot of people talk about this issue. I don't know where you get this. Nobody. That's because you don't watch any of our videos or watch our stuff.
The Bush administration. This is, I'm going to just say it's speculation because it was given to me by a source that I trust, but I was never able to confirm it. Essentially, you know, Richard Clark doing that film, being the critical guy at the 9/11 Commission, very limited hangout, but then after the fact, talking about the CIA, keeping it from the Justice Department, keeping it from the FBI, more than likely running the unit, absolutely having al-Mihdhar. I was told that Richard Clark, and again, I want to, just so I don't get sued or we don't get in trouble, that Richard Clark was a closeted homosexual. He did not want it to come out as he has a family and a wife, and that's where, you know, his weak point was. And we all know that they use compromised individuals at the highest levels for these certain reasons. Can't confirm that. Not trying to throw shade Richard's way, but hey, we have to look at these things because that's how DC works. Everybody who doesn't understand the larger spectrum of this, that really the hijackers are just one part of this entire story, but it's a part we've been lied to again and again and again. And we just can't be sure which hijackers were on what planes, what they actually did, because Mel, as you also know, and I know I've been on a bit of a rant here because it's reality.
No, I love it. It's important. It's so important. People have to understand the level of lying that has been done to the American people. You know, you're one guy, I always use your thing, and I do give you credit. You always say it's not about left and right, it's right and wrong. The American people have to understand, forget what team you're on. The level of lying to we the people over the last 50 years is so criminal and so sick that, you know, you're only as sick as your secrets. Our country's very sick because of the secrets. And you're one of the guys that's like, I'm just going to tell the truth, but it's coming so fast now that you have to. So continue, please.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny coming from Mel K here because she's a conservative, a biblical conservative, right? Evangelical Christian who basically advocates for Donald Trump. And you talk about left and right and wrong, right? But you already chose a side, no different than people of the left, right? They're both compromised. They both serve the establishment, right? The fossil fuel industry, the foreign lobby industry, the military industrial complex, the banking industry, okay? The Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, Saudi oil. There's a lot of interests that the United States wishes to protect, whether you're from this, you know, Trump aura, conservative values, or you're from the progressives and support the Democrats, you're all the same. You just fly different color flags and think you're different, but you're not.
So another story that became rather large in the past several months because the mainstream media finally paid attention to it, and actually TMZ did a documentary of all people, right? For Hulu was United 23. And they go through what I covered all the way back in 2008, that you had another plane on the morning of 9/11 in which people boarded, appeared to be very upset when they weren't going to take off, left the plane, but left their luggage there. And lo and behold, like magic, Mel, it had the same exact stuff in it that was in Atta's luggage that didn't make Flight 11. You know, the stuff like the Quran and them casing the plane. And
it's not true. Actually, what they found was an Al-Qaeda manual. Now, the Al-Qaeda manual was written by Muhammad Atta, in which they talked about the cleansing of the body to shave off the hair, because what they believed was when they enter Jannah, which is heaven, that they will be pure in body, spirit, right? But their spirit has to be without hair, no facial hair, and no hair on their arms. Funny thing is that, according to the flight attendant that reported on these people in first class, there was 3 men or 2 men and 1 sitting in business, and there was 1 woman who was wearing a full niqab and burqa, right? And this person was a man because the flight attendant noticed that the arms were that of a man and had hair on their arms. Maybe that's the reason why Muhammad Atta wanted to give out this manual, so that if whoever these people were, and they don't have to be Al-Qaeda, we don't know who they were. Remember, Al-Qaeda, if we're going by the story, okay, takes a grain of salt. There's 19 fundamentalists. Okay, if there's 3 or 4 in this plane, that makes it 23. Who are these people? Bin Laden doesn't talk about them. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed doesn't talk about them. And we have no records of them meeting with the other 19. Or do we? Were these people the same people that Muhammad Atta and Abdulaziz al-Mari were meeting in Portland? Because that's why Atta and Abdulaziz were going to Portland, which myself and DJ the Detonator speculate that the reason why they went there is because they were meeting with somebody, was a couple of people, in regards to having contact with the others. We're going to be involved with the additional hijackings or the second wave of attacks. That Bob Graham, the co-chair of the Joint House Inquiry, admits that they were fully aware that it was going to be another wave of attacks. Zacharias Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker, said, now he wasn't tortured either, said in his own trial that he was selected to the second wave of attacks. Well, who are these people? They don't have to be Al-Qaeda, but we don't know who they are. So, but Jason won't tell you that much. They didn't find a Quran in the luggage. They did find box cutters. I think they found a pilot's uniform.
all these things that you would bring on a plane that was a suicide mission that would prove your guilt, right?
Yeah.
So I saw Bill Maher talk about this with the head of TMZ on his Clubhouse.
They didn't need that to prove their guilt. They were already seen at the airports by security officials. The FBI did an extensive investigation into the airline employees who handled the hijackers at these airports. They were seen there. They were given their boarding passes.
Podcast, right? And he's like, well, there's no doubt there was another plane that was going to be hijacked that day, and maybe even others. Again, if you were watching Fabled Enemies, if you were paying attention, you would know that there were already numerous other hijackings and reports of bombs on other planes via the drills, via mistakes.
Right.
Okay, those all happened. They were following those, many of which were coming out of Cheyenne Mountain for 20 minutes after Flight 93. Even Time Magazine did an article where they alluded to that these were inside jobs and they had found other weapons which were unspecified, so not necessarily just box cutters, Mel, on numerous other planes that day.
That's
So
right.
that means pre-planted weapons for this operation. We can't be sure if it was just box cutters. In fact, in the initial reports of Flight 11, the first plane to hit the tower, it was said that there was a gun on board. And then,
Very
with the
good.
Dark Overlord documents, another little gem that came out was the person who first got that report from somebody who had called from one of the plane phones, not a cell phone or anything like that. So that also seemed extremely significant. Guns aren't supposed to be involved in this at all, Mel. And if you had planted weapons beyond even the box cutters or other types of knives, if you actually had guns that got in there on multiple airports, on multiple flights, and those people didn't get on the plane, I didn't see any trials for these people. I don't know about any arrests. It was kept hush-hush, or those people were protected because it was part of the plan as well. And the plan.
Hey, now we're talking, right? I mean, for God's sakes, and this is the end of the video, so I'll cut off here. Hey, now we're talking, right? Because this is something that DJ Thermal Detonator has basically, repeated ad nauseum about looking into the security apparatuses of the airlines in Dulles and Logan and even in Newark, all right? And maybe other airlines as well. But this was all covered up. It was, and Jason's right about this. In fact, one of the leading security companies that was involved with Logan was Argenbright Security, headed by Frank Argenbright. And he was the only person to ever be fired from his position. And it wasn't really his fault, but I mean, his company did have a history of hiring individuals with, suspect backgrounds that they didn't do very well in background checks. Maybe that's the reason why you had these additional planes on the additional weapons on these planes, was because you had individuals who were basically associates or assets of Al Qaeda, and maybe who knows else that was involved with the additional airlines and that were going to be hijacked. We don't know who they were. Covered up by the FBI and Immigration Naturalization Service, who deported those individuals on September 13th, 14th that were arrested. So, yeah, and there's your problem, right? But, I just wanted to basically talk about some of these issues with Jason Bermas, and you can see he still gets a couple of things wrong. And I just wanted to right the ship. So see you in the next video. Have a good night.